Now we want to get you to that tragic mass shooting in Shreveport, Louisiana. Police say 8 children, ranging in age from 3 to 11 years old, were killed in a violent domestic incident. 7 of them were the gunman's.
7 children were located inside that were deceased. There was an additional deceased child that looked like he had tried to escape the residence out the back on the roof.
We're standing in this place again. There are 8 children that are deceased. I can't be strong for you. I think about the mother and what this family has lost. I think about this community and what this community has lost. And I don't have the words to give you, and I'm sorry.
On the morning of April 19th, 2026, a 13-year-old boy made a decision. He climbed to a second-floor window. He looked down at the ground below. And he jumped. He landed hard, bones broke, but he was alive. But that fall, from that height, with those broken bones on the other side of it, was still the better option. Whatever was happening in the rooms below that window made the ground the safer place to be. Inside that house on the 300 block of West 79th Street in Shreveport, Louisiana, 8 children were not going to make it out. I've covered a lot of hard cases on this channel, cases that keep me up, cases I carry with me long after the camera stops. I want to be straight with you about this one. This one landed differently, not because of the number, though the number is devastating, because of who the number represents, because of how ordinary that Saturday night was supposed to be, because of who was responsible. The man believed to have killed those 8 children was not a stranger who broke in from outside. He was their father. He knew every one of those faces. He was in those rooms for years before that morning, and he walked back through them anyway. If you're new here, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Every case on this channel is researched to this standard. No guesswork, no sensationalism, only verified facts. The families of these 8 children deserve an audience that shows up fully. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. We read every single one. By Sunday morning, Shreveport authorities had confirmed the number. 8 children dead. The youngest was 3 years old. The oldest was 11. I want to say their names before we go any further, because 8 lives reduced to a number is its own erasure, and these were not numbers. Jayla Elkins, 3 years old. Shayla Elkins, 5 years old. Braylon Snow, 5 years old. Kayla Pugh, 6 years old. Khedarrion Snow, 6 years old. Layla Pugh, 7 years old. Markaydon Pugh, 10 years old. Sariahh Snow, 11 years old. 5 girls and 3 boys. 7 of them were siblings, their last names, Elkins, Pugh, and Snow, reflecting the structure of the 2 households involved. The 8th child, a cousin, was there because it was Easter weekend, and that is what families do on Easter weekend. They gather. Crystal Brown, a cousin of one of the 2 women who survived, spoke to reporters in the days following. She described those kids without hesitation. Happy kids, she said. Very friendly, very sweet. That was not a grieving relative reaching for something kind to say. That was someone who had actually known them. At 11, Sariahh Snow was at the age where life starts to take real shape, where friendships become serious, where you start to understand who you are. And at 3, Jayla Elkins had barely moved past her earliest years. Both of them were in that house. All 8 of them were in that house, together on a Saturday night, on a holiday weekend, and none of them knew what was coming with the sun. Their deaths marked the 8th through 15th homicides in Shreveport in 2026. 8 lives, 1 morning. Now, let's learn about the man who did this. Shamar Deonte Elkins was born on January 1st, 1995 in Shreveport, Louisiana. He was 31 years old. He had lived in Shreveport his entire life. By multiple accounts from people who knew him, he was a visible presence in his community, a father who showed up, someone whose face and name were known on his block. That is the version of Shamar Elkins most people around him had access to. The one who posted Easter photos. The one who took his oldest child out for one-on-one time the day before everything ended. The one who looked, from the outside, like a father who was present. What was underneath that presentation is what this case is actually about. In August of 2013, at 18 years old, Elkins enlisted in the Louisiana Army National Guard. He served for 7 years. August 2013 through August 2020. During that time, he held two roles. The first was Signal Support System Specialist, designated 25U, setting up and maintaining military communications equipment. The second was Fire Support Specialist, designated 13F, a position that involves coordinating and directing firepower in the field, a role that requires precision, operational discipline, and the ability to remain functional under significant pressure. He was never deployed to a combat zone. He left the National Guard in August 2020 at the rank of private, the entry-level enlisted rank. 7 years, no advancement. What his military service established on record, beyond anything else, is that Shamar Elkins was formally trained with firearms. He was not unfamiliar with weapons. That becomes critical information when you see what he did with them. In 2019, while still technically a member of the National Guard, Elkins was arrested in Shreveport on 2 separate charges. Because the incident took place less than 300 feet from the fence line of Caddo Magnet High School. According to the police report, a friend had arrived to pick him up. A separate individual in that vehicle produced a firearm and directed it at Elkins. Elkins responded by firing 5 rounds at the car as it pulled away. Children were on the school grounds at the time. The direction of those 5 rounds placed them in the vicinity of the school. He was charged with illegal use of a weapon and with carrying a firearm on school property. In October 2019, he appeared before Caddo District Court and entered a guilty plea on the illegal weapons charge. The court sentenced him to 18 months of probation. The school property charge was dismissed as part of the resolution. That guilty plea produced one of the most significant legal facts in this entire case. Under federal law, a conviction for illegal use of a weapon makes a person a prohibited firearm possessor. From the moment that plea was entered in October 2019, Shamar Elkins was legally barred from owning, purchasing, or possessing any firearm under any circumstance. That prohibition had been active for more than 6 years when April 19, 2026 arrived. On that morning, he had 2. This is the part of the case I want you to pay close attention to, because what happened on April 19th did not appear from nowhere. It had a trail. Approximately 1 month before the incident, Elkins reposted a question circulating on social media, directed at fathers, asking whether, if they could go back and choose a different partner while still having the same children, they would. Elkins reposted it with his own answer, an unambiguous, enthusiastic yes. Viewed in isolation, a reposted social media prompt is nothing. Viewed against the backdrop of a man whose decade-long relationship was actively collapsing, who was days away from a court appearance that was going to formalize that collapse whether he wanted it to or not, behavioral analysts who reviewed his posts after April 19th identified it as consistent with someone processing resentment and a growing sense of grievance about his circumstances. 10 days before the incident, he posted again. This time, the tone had shifted. He wrote that he was going through a period of personal difficulty and was turning to prayer to manage it. That post was visible to his entire social network. Nobody who saw it treated it as a signal that required a response. No mental health services were contacted. No follow-up of any kind was documented. The third signal was the separation itself. Elkins and his wife had been together for years. They had 4 children together. And in the period immediately preceding April 19th, the relationship had been deteriorating toward a legal conclusion that was no longer avoidable. Crystal Brown confirmed to the Associated Press that the two had been actively arguing about the separation in the days before that Sunday morning. The argument had not been settled. The 4th signal was a date on a calendar. On Monday, April 20th, the morning after the incident, Elkins and his wife were scheduled to appear before a court to address the separation formally and legally. That court date was 1 day away. Retired FBI Supervisory Agent Jason Pack reviewed this case and offered public analysis of what behavioral scientists call a pathway toward harmful outcomes. It is a documented framework built from decades of studying cases like this one. The pathway begins with a grievance, a loss the person didn't choose and can't reverse. The fixation deepens. Over time, the family stops being experienced as independent people with their own lives and becomes experienced as an extension of the individual's own identity, something being taken from him rather than people exercising their freedom. When the finality of that loss becomes unavoidable, The pathway reaches its end. Agent Pack was direct. Outcomes like this do not happen without a prior process. They build, they leave indicators. In this case, those indicators were present. They were on record. And not one of them connected to a formal intervention, a social media post about regretting his relationship, a post about personal crisis, an escalating domestic conflict, a court date one day away, and a 2019 criminal record that had already demonstrated he was willing to discharge a firearm in a residential area while children were nearby. 4 indicators, 0 interventions. The last ordinary day in Cedar Grove was Saturday, April 18, 2026. That evening, all 7 of Elkins's children, along with their cousin, were at the West 79th Street home. His wife was present. His girlfriend, the mother of 3 of the children, Ish, was also connected to the household that night. 8 children under one roof on an Easter weekend. That is what Saturday looked like. At approximately 5 o'clock in the morning on April 19th, Elkins moved first. He went to a residence on Harrison Street, where his wife was located. She was shot. She sustained a wound to her face and severe injuries. She survived. From Harrison Street, he drove to the 300 block of West 79th Street, the family home, where the children were sleeping. I want you to understand something about that sequence. He went to one address first, then he made a decision to drive to a second address. That is not a man who lost control in a moment. That is a man who kept choosing. Every step of that sequence was a choice. His girlfriend, the mother of the 8th child, was also at West 79th Street. She was shot and sustained injuries described by authorities as life-threatening. Investigators confirmed that most of the children were asleep when the shooting occurred. A Louisiana state representative speaking to CNN afterward said that some of the children attempted to leave through the back of the home during the incident. One child made it further than any of the others. Sariahh Snow was 11 years old. She was the oldest of the 8 children who did not survive. At some point during those early morning hours, Sariahh reached the roof of a building adjacent to the home. She had gotten outside. She had found higher ground. Investigators found her on that roof. She did not survive. The 13-year-old boy, whose identity has been protected and will not be named here, reached a second-floor window. He made the decision to jump as he fell. Bones broke. He is expected to make a full physical recovery. He is the only young person who made it out of that house alive on April 19th. Across the street, 71-year-old Mac London had lived on that block since 1991, 35 years on the same street. He told reporters he heard nothing unusual that morning. He stepped outside around 7 a.m. to close his gate, the same as he did every morning, and found a neighborhood he didn't recognize. Police units everywhere, emergency vehicles, the block sealed off, residents standing at a distance trying to understand what they were looking at. In 35 years on that block, he said, nothing like this had ever happened, not once. While Shreveport police officers were still working the scene on West 79th Street, Elkins was already in motion. At the corner of West 79th Street and Linwood Avenue, less than half a block from where 8 children had just lost their lives, he approached a man at gunpoint and took his vehicle by force. A carjacking, carried out while law enforcement units were actively responding to the neighborhood. Shreveport patrol officers located the stolen vehicle and initiated a pursuit. The chase moved out of Caddo Parish and crossed into Bossier Parish, just across the Red River from Shreveport, a short distance from Cedar Grove. The pursuit ended at the 400 block of Brompton Lane in Bossier City. Officers made contact with Elkins. An exchange of gunfire took place. Shamar Elkins was pronounced dead at the scene. No law enforcement officer was injured. Because Shreveport officers discharged their service weapons during the confrontation, the investigation into that specific exchange was transferred to Louisiana State Police, the standard procedure in Louisiana when officers are involved in a shooting. 2 parallel legal tracks were now running. The homicide investigation with Shreveport Police Department, the officer-involved shooting investigation with Louisiana State Police. Corporal Christopher Braylon was unambiguous when he addressed reporters. One individual was responsible for every round fired across all locations that morning: Harrison Street, West 79th Street, the carjacking at Linwood, and Brompton Lane in Bossier City. No other person discharged a weapon at any of those scenes. What Shreveport police officers were working that Sunday morning was not a single scene. It was 4, spread across 2 parishes, each requiring independent evidence documentation, a forensic collection, and witness accounts, all running simultaneously. The agencies that responded included Shreveport Police Department, the Caddo Parish Sheriff's Office, Louisiana State Police, Shreveport Fire Department, the Auburn Police Department, and the French Quarter Sheriff's Office. Corporal Braylon described it as one of the most extensive scenes most of his colleagues had ever been required to process. That was not an exaggeration. 2 weapons were recovered, a small caliber handgun determined to have been used inside the homes, and a rifle-style pistol in Elkins's possession when officers confronted him in Bossier City. Both weapons immediately raised the question that has not yet been answered publicly. Shamar Elkins had been legally prohibited from possessing any firearms since October 2019. That prohibition had been in place for more than 6 years. He had 2 guns on the morning of April 19th. How he obtained those weapons, through what means, from what source, and whether any individual knowingly transferred firearms to a person they knew to be legally prohibited from having them, had not been publicly resolved at the time this documentary was produced. Under federal law, knowingly providing firearms to a prohibited person is a federal offense. Whether that line of inquiry is being actively pursued has not been confirmed. Police Chief Wayne Smith addressed reporters at the scene. His statement was measured, but the weight of what he'd seen was visible on him. He said he could not begin to understand how an event like this could occur. When he confirmed that the department's peer support network, specifically trained for incidents of severe operational stress, had been activated for officers who responded that morning. Even that network, he acknowledged, had not encountered anything comparable. No prior calls to law enforcement had been logged at either residential address. No protective orders were on file. No child welfare intervention at those addresses existed in the record. From a formal system standpoint, those households had not been flagged, which means every warning indicator that existed had failed to move through any channel that would have created a formal record or triggered any kind of response before that morning. Cedar Grove is the kind of neighborhood where people know each other, not formally, but by faces, by cars, by which houses are loud on which nights. Mac London had 35 years on that block. People like him had been present the whole time. What they saw, what they sensed, and what they did or didn't do with it is a question this case will carry for a long time. My mother used to say she never trusted Cheerful that hard. She couldn't explain why, not exactly. But she was right about things like that more often than she was wrong. Most of us have sat in a room with someone and felt something we couldn't name, and then talked ourselves out of it. That is human, but it has a cost when the thing we're talking ourselves out of turns out to be real. Mayor Tom Arsenault had been at the scene since the early hours. When he spoke publicly, he did not soften his assessment. Yet he called it possibly the worst tragedy the city of Shreveport had ever confronted. In a later written statement, he addressed the community directly. Shreveport was grieving the loss of innocent children, and no language was adequate for it. He also went further than a standard sympathy statement. He named the conditions specifically: harmful behavior within the home, unaddressed personal trauma, and the culture of silence that allows both to persist without intervention. Councilwoman Tabitha Taylor broke down during her public remarks. She made a direct appeal to mental health professionals across the city, asking them to provide support not only to the families most directly affected, but to first responders, to neighbors, to anyone in the community carrying the weight of that Sunday morning. Councilman Grayson Boucher brought data to his statement. He noted that before April 19th, more than 30% of all crimes and more than 30% of all homicides in Shreveport were already domestic in origin. He then stated what the numbers showed. This single incident had more than doubled Shreveport's total homicide count for all of 2026 in one morning. He called it pure evil. And he made a specific point about the future. Without sustained and meaningful intervention in domestic conflict situations, the city would remain vulnerable to outcomes exactly like this one. The Caddo Parish District Attorney's Office put something on the public record that deserves to be repeated here. Family-related violence is not a private matter confined to the household where it occurs. It is a community matter with consequences that reach far beyond those directly involved, and the people most consistently affected by it are the most vulnerable. In this case, that meant 8 children. Pastor Marty T. Johnson senior of St. Gabriel Community Baptist Church, whose property was connected to one of the scenes, announced publicly that he would organize a prayer vigil for the victims and commit directly to assisting the families with burial arrangements and costs. Cedar Grove, a neighborhood most people outside northwest Louisiana had never heard of before April 19th, became, within hours of that Sunday morning, a name known across the country. If you're still here, this is the standard. Every case on this channel is researched to this depth. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. The sharing this video means these 8 children's story reaches people beyond this moment, and that matters. This case will be processed through official channels. The homicide investigation will reach a formal conclusion. The officer-involved shooting review will produce its findings. And then, for the institutions involved, it will be a completed event. For the people who lived through it, it is not a completed event. It is the thing that happened and will not stop happening. There are threads in this case that still have no public resolution. The motive. Shreveport police designated this as domestic from the beginning, and the available evidence supports that designation fully. But a designation is not a confirmed motive. What specifically was said in those final hours? What specific moment, if any, served as the immediate trigger? Now, those details have not been confirmed on the record. The firearms. Elkins had been prohibited from possessing weapons since 2019. He had 2 on April 19th. The question of how he obtained them has not been publicly addressed. The Louisiana State Police investigation into the Brompton Lane confrontation. No formal determination has been released publicly as to whether Elkins was struck by officer fire or otherwise. State police confirmed no officers were harmed and indicated no wrongdoing, but official findings had not been made public at the time this documentary was produced. The 2 women who survived. Elkins's wife, shot at Harrison Street, was in very serious condition as of Sunday, April 19th. His girlfriend, shot at West 79th Street, had life-threatening injuries. Their recoveries, physical, psychological, and everything that follows for each of them in the months and years ahead, belong entirely to them. No official process will fully account for what they carry going forward. The 13-year-old boy. His identity is protected and will remain so. What he witnessed, what he carries from that morning, and what support he is currently receiving have not been publicly shared. What is not in question is what a young person in his position requires: sustained, professional, long-term trauma support. Whether that support is being provided at the necessary level has not been confirmed. Each of those threads is documented, each of them matters, and none of them will be closed by the end of a news cycle. Louisiana carries one of the highest domestic violence fatality rates in the country. Shreveport sits inside that reality with a social services infrastructure that has been chronically under-resourced. None of that caused what Shamar Elkins chose to do. But it shapes the environment where warning signs had fewer places to land and fewer people trained to catch them. That is an institutional failure that deserves a plain, honest name. Part of the explanation for why those 4 indicators went unaddressed is structural. Part of it is legal. A social media post does not establish grounds for law enforcement action. A post expressing personal difficulty is not an automatic referral to mental health services. An argument between 2 adults is not, by itself, a basis for police intervention. The legal standards required to trigger formal action are specific, and in this case, none of the indicators reached those standards before April 19th. But the question that this case makes unavoidable is not only what Shamar Elkins chose to do. The question that follows is what conditions allowed 4 documented indicators to exist without producing a single coordinated intervention. There is no clean answer. But it is the question that Cedar Grove demands. What justice owes the survivors and those 8 children is speed, clarity, and a public record that speaks their names without reducing them to a statistic. Anything less is a second failure, and in cases like this one, the second failure is always quieter than the first, which is exactly how it keeps happening. On April 19th, 2026, 8 children who had gone to sleep on a Saturday night in Cedar Grove did not wake up the following morning. Jayla, Shayla, Braylon. Kayla, Khedarrion, Layla, Markaydon, Sariahh. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to find more on these cases.